Shalom to the people, man. It's your brother Nehemiah, Nehemiah, your fellow saint of Yahweh, right? Coming back at you again with another class, right? So first and foremost, I want to give all honor and all glory to the Heavenly Father in the name of His Son Yeshua Mashiach, right? Um, for giving us this day to be able to come back and be able to bring forth this class. Now, I did this class some time ago, a while ago, probably like a year and a half ago. I did a class on this topic, right? You won't see it on this channel, uh but did a class on it, right? And coming into the faith, it was a lot of biased perspectives, passed down from elders of old, right? But since I started to apply Romans 3 and 4, Acts chapter 17 of verse 11, um, John chapter 5 verse 39, I think that's the Most High is, giving me, grace and mercy to be able to see what the scripture is actually saying as it is written from an unbiased perspective, right? And really getting the understanding of the scriptures exactly how it is written, how it is said, right? So with that being said, man, the topic of this class is understanding circumcision and uncircumcision. So we're going to get into this, and we're going to try to make it easy to understand for the viewer, right? For somebody who might not quite understand circumcision, uncircumcision, the biblical definitions for these things in their proper context, so on and so forth, right? So we're going to get into that. So we're not going to waste no time. Let's go ahead and get in. Let me pull up this PowerPoint so we can get started with this, man. And right, so you see it up here. We have understanding circumcision and uncircumcision, right? So let's continue. The purpose of this class, right? One thing we need to understand is we can't recreate what we want circumcision or uncircumcision and what it means, right? And there's multiple meanings of that, spiritual and physical. So we can't create our own definitions based on biased perspectives we may have, or whatever we may have been taught, passed down from elders who, gave us what we needed for a time and for us to be able to build on top of the foundation, but in the correct spirit, in the correct way, according to how it is written, right? But the purpose of this class, right, is I'm starting to implement the purpose of this class because I've noticed I've noticed from just seeing people that do teach online, they do a class, but they don't really give the purpose of the class, and it's not really needed, but I feel like it's something good for somebody to see so they can understand, okay, what we going over right now. This is the purpose of where we're trying to get to. What is it that we're trying to see in the scriptures and find out and understand? So this is the reason why I'm implementing this. So the purpose of the class is to show that Israelites, Hebrews, Jews have been deemed based on the covenant of circumcision called the circumcision, right? We're going to go through scriptures and we're going to see that the scriptures bear that out, right? Also to show that the Gentiles, heathens, strangers in proper context, proselyte, have always been called the uncircumcision, right? Now, with a few instances, you have Israel being considered uncircumcised by, in First Maccabees, so on and so forth. Sometimes people will use those scriptures and run with them. But you got to be careful with doing that. But I'm going to also be doing a class about the mysteries of Abraham's circumcision, but that's going to come at a later date. This class is going to be, this class in itself is going to be, this class in itself is going to be a few part series, right? So most high willing, we can kind of get it all done in a 3-part series, but other than that, we're gonna do the best to get this out there for y'all, right? So let's continue, right? You got now, before I get into what you see right here now is if you haven't seen, I did a series called how to study the Bible, and I really need to change the name of that. I need to change it to how I study the Bible, because I'm sharing things that I use and implement myself, right? given the things that I've learned, nouns, verbs, going back over all that stuff, going over the basics, right, of reading comprehension. So if you should go to the playlist section on my YouTube channel and go to how to study the Bible series, right, and I go over what you see right here, right, which is the 5 W's. I go over this, so I have a whole series on that. You can go ahead and watch that, and I go through a few different things and share what it is that I use, right. Also, you'll find the PowerPoint in the link in those in the description of those videos. But I want to call to remembrance the 5 W's. Anytime you're going over a specific topic, you want to try your best to try to remember the 5 W's. And it's not that you need to do this, but it's a good thing to get in a habit of doing, right? If you trying to understand the Bible a little bit more better, you can grasp it more by implementing tools like this, right? So I say, don't forget the basics. Ask yourself these basic questions and take note after you understand the definitions of circumcision and uncircumcision, both physically, literally, in the flesh, and spiritually, metaphorically, symbolically, in spirit, right? Ask yourself who, what, when, where, why, and you can even implement how in there, right? Which really helps a lot. For additional clarity, you can always find the how if you desire to do so. This can help in many different aspects of understanding what you're studying, right? So now, with that being said, call it to the remembrance who the 5 W's, so on and so forth. It's something good that you can use, right, while studying the scriptures. So, who are the circumcision? It's a question, and that's what we're trying to find out, right? Who are the circumcision? So, what is the biblical definition of the circumcision? And then, don't jump to conclusions. Most people are like, oh, Bible dictionaries, and hey, they're tools. They're here for a reason. Utilize them, and all you do is you go back and you check the scriptures to see if these things are so, right? So, what is the biblical definition of circumcision? We have right here in the Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary, we have the definition of circumcision, and it says, excuse me, my thing keeps switching slides. It says circumcision, right? A cutting around, the cutting off of the foreskin, a rite instituted by God as the sign of the covenant between him and Abraham and his descendants. Genesis chapter 17 and verse 10. That he would be their God and they were to belong to him, worshiping and obeying only him. It was made a legal institution in the wilderness by Moses. Leviticus chapter 12, verse 3. John chapter 7, verse 22 and 23. Every male child was circumcised on the 8th day after its birth. Other nations also practiced the rite. Egyptians, Arabians, etc. Right? The Christian church refused to force Gentiles to be circumcised. Acts chapter 15, Galatians 5. That's a whole big deal right here. Acts chapter 15. That is a whole debated thing between, many people on if those Gentiles are Israelites or if they're actually Gentiles. But that is another topic, right? Then you have the Cruden's Complete Concordance. This is an older concordance that I got, right? I try to get old stuff as well to kind of see the differences between the new and the old, right? Or if there are any differences at all between the two. Right. So circumcision in here says literally the cutting off of the prepuce, meaning the, foreskin, a religious rite of the Jews, metaphorically, the purifying spiritually. Since all male Jews must by law be circumcised, the word is often used to mean the Jews in distinction from Gentiles. Right. In this case, also, it is used metaphorically. So one thing to note is that if proselytes, they can also be considered circumcised due to metaphorically, spiritually as well, right? By taking on the customs of Israel. So it can be used in that sense as well. When you read in the scriptures, there will be places where you will see that. So but the point I really like about Cruden's Complete Concordance is that It says, since all male Jews must by law be circumcised, the word is often used to mean the Jews in distinction from the Gentiles right now, because when I came into the faith, I was taught, right, that the Gentiles in the New Testament are Israelites, right? But I was never taught, I was never taught or seen anybody really getting into showing hard proof of that these people are. It was just misuse of scriptures, um misuse of scriptures, and kind of just regurgitating what it was that was passed down, right? And until I really started to question things, really started coming across scripture to be like, hold on, man, I was like, yeah, maybe this probably ain't this. How I understand it probably ain't the right way to understand it. Then that's when I really started digging deep, man. And then obviously, like I said, you can't. Earlier, I said you can't create your own definitions of things. You can't try to reword what these words mean. The scriptures clearly outline what it means, and gives us what it means. So that's the reason why I like this crude and complete concordance part, right? Is it left this in here, that it was a distinction between the Jews and the Gentiles. And also one thing to note, that is after the captivity in Kings, right, the term Jew was applied to all of Israel at one point in time. So even when you do read in the New Testament, you see Jews, obviously that's more so dealing with, well, let me not skip ahead, but after the captivity, you can even look it up in the Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary. After the captivity, I think it's in Second Kings, right? The word Jew applied to all Israelites, right? But in the New Testament, it's more so, it's like, it's being used towards like Southern Kingdom, because um the Northern Kingdom was kind of like scattered, but you did have the person, the sister that was at Christ's circumcision out of the Northern Kingdom. But the point is that Jews, the term Jew was applied to all Israelites at after the captivity. So that's another thing to take with you. You can go ahead and go fact check it, go verify it for yourself, but you can look up in the Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary. You might Google even tell you, but and you can just do some research on it. And the proof is there. But let's continue. What is the biblical definition of circumcision? Now we got Harper's Bible Dictionary, right? The cool thing about this dictionary is that it is it's different. It's different sects of Protestant, Baptist, all these other sects, and they all kind of like have their definitions in here, and you'll see the differences when you're going through that. So Harper's, if you do your research on Harper's Bible Dictionaries, you'll be able to see that it's kind of like all these different people from different backgrounds of religions and stuff putting in their definitions on what they see in the scripture. So you gotta cipher out some things and stuff like that. But it's good to have, because you can kind of see you'll see the differences. But circumcision in here is it says a very ancient Semitic rite involving the removal of the foreskin, which is a Greek word. I think it's praepatium, of male members of the community. Among Hebrews, the custom is based upon Abraham's example, the procedure being a token of the covenant between the patriarch and Yahweh. Genesis 17:10-14, right? The narrative of Exodus chapter 4:24-26 associates its origin with Moses. The use of a flint knife indicated in this passage points to the early date at which the ceremony was practiced. The Hebrews may have adopted the custom from Egyptians, so which is crazy, because when I read that, I was just like, nah, the scriptures clearly say in Genesis 17, like that came from the Most High. That didn't come from no Egyptians. So that's what I mean. Like just because you got a Bible dictionary and you going and you looking at these definitions, these people who are coming up with this stuff, they're still men. So it's not like what they say is just that's what it is. No, you gotta go back and examine. These are still men putting together, trying to understand the word of the Most High, just like you, right? And trying to become, get better and get more wisdom, get more understanding, and get more knowledge while we striving in the faith, right? So, but that right there, and I read that, I'm like, then you could really start to see the differences of what I was talking about the Harper's Bible Dictionary, right? Is it says the Hebrews may have adopted the custom from the Egyptians, which I believe is completely inaccurate, because the Most High told Abraham, do this. So this, to me, this is completely off. The Hebrews may have adopted the custom from Egyptian sources for Egyptians and Canaanites, as well as Muslims, Polynesians, and many primitive tribes of America, Africa, and Australia have practiced circumcision or still do. Originally, Hebrews did not circumcise boys until they reached puberty. Later, they performed the operation on the 8th day after birth. Leviticus 12:3. Well, I say that's why you got to go back, because ever since Abraham, it was a custom. It was a custom. You even see it, even with you don't really see an account with Jacob being circumcised, but you can already know that Jacob was given the customs that was given. And not only that, you see when you get to Genesis 34, when you see Simeon and Levi, and they're telling that I think it's the Hittites, when the Hittite man raped Dinah, their sister, they tell them, even though they're being crafty and sneaky, they told them that, hey, we can't mingle with people who are uncircumcised. So it just goes to show you that circumcision was there even from Isaac to Jacob on down. So when I see stuff like, originally Hebrews did not circumcise boys until they reach puberty, I'm like, it's kind of doesn't sound right, because the scriptures just kind of contradicts what they saying, right? So you always want to go with what the scriptures say. So sometimes you got to weed some of this stuff out. Hebrews did not circumcise boys until they reached puberty. Later, they performed the operation on the 8th day after birth, right? So obviously, the Most High said to do that in Genesis 17. So it's not like Leviticus, they started doing on the 8th day. No, it's been implemented since Genesis, right? Leviticus 12:3. At which time the name was given the son, Luke 1, and other scriptures. In early times, circumcising was done by a parent, later as now by a professional mohel, right? You got brothers that's in Israel right now. They do circumcisions and stuff like that. Excuse me. They got the whole kit and all that to be able to do that for children on the 8th day, a child on the 8th day. Excuse me. There are several theories offered to explain the ancient custom. Hygienic considerations, like the prevention of venereal diseases, preparation for sexual life, ritual for initiation. I know in some like African communities, like that's their circumcision is completely different from ours, and how they do it is kind of strange the way they do it, because they could be grown men. It's strange. I seen it on some show. I can't remember the name of it, but anyways, hygienic considerations, the ancient custom, like the prevention of venereal diseases, preparation for sexual life, ritual for initiation into a tribal group, dedication of the generative organs, acknowledgement of the male's life-giving God. One of the issues on which Jewish and Gentile Christians split was the matter of circumcision. Paul and Barnabas won the debate before the Jerusalem Council in the whole matter of Mosaic law, with reference to the new Christian faith, and liberalized the requirements for admission. Acts 15:20. Circumcision has continued throughout Hebrew history. In the Old Testament as well as in the New Testament, circumcision is mentioned symbolically. Uncircumcised lips, Exodus 6:12. You also got Deuteronomy 10. Well, just talking about the heart, but Deuteronomy 10 is the circumcision made in putting off the body of the sins of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ, right? Colossians 2, that's powerful right there when you really start to understand that, because you still being circumcised, right? It's not to say don't physically circumcise your child on the 8th day. Yeah, keep the law still, man. Circumcise your male child on the 8th day. But also you got to understand that there's something that's deeper than that, man. Remember that the Hebrews 10:1 said these things are foreshadows. They're foreshadows, man. Yeah, still do it, but you got to understand that it's deeper than that. It's deeper than just cutting some skin off, man. It's way deeper than that, man. You got to search. You got to circumcise this thing right here. That's important. Okay, but sometime after the 4th century, the church began to observe the 8th day after Christmas, Luke 20:21, as the feast of the circumcision to commemorate Christ's obedience to the law and to offset pagan excesses at the New Year worship of Janus. Right. So look into the Harper's Bible Dictionary, man. It's kind of crazy because you can kind of get different perspectives on how people may understand it depending on what background of religion they come from. So, but it's good to have these type of tools because you can kind of weed out. It's a good tool to have, right? So let's go ahead, and you got the Vines Complete Expository Dictionary of the Old and New Testament words, right? What does circumcision? What does circumcised mean in here? You got mole, as you'll see, right? H4135, right? It says to circumcise, cut off. You've seen this, like all of them have said that, right? To cut off the prepuce, right? To circumcise, cut off. This verb occurs more than 30 times in the Old Testament. Its usage is continued in Rabbinic and modern Hebrew. However, the verb to cut off is not found in other Semitic languages. That's a good thing to know. Most of the occurrence in the Old Testament take place in the Pentateuch or the Torah, 20 times, and Joshua 8 times. Mole occurs most frequently in Genesis 17 times, 11 of them in Genesis 17 alone. And Joshua 8 times. Mole occurs in 3 of the 7 verb patterns and in several where patterns. It has no derivatives other than mulat in Exodus chapter 4, verse 26. At that time, she said, what is it? Bridegroomer of blood, or bridegroom of blood, referring to the circumcision. That's when Moses' wife was circumcising their son, and she said, a bloody husband thou art, and do this stuff. But the physical act of circumcision was introduced by God. See, so you see how the Vines got it right. Harper's didn't. They didn't. So you got to remember, man, just because you got these tools, these are still men. Romans chapter 3, let God be true and every man a liar, man. Whatever the scriptures say, that's what it is, man. That's what it is. Simple comparative text, knowing what nouns and verbs, little stuff like that, and context clues, you're gonna be all right, man. And an unbiased unbiased mindset and the mind of a child, the Most High prayer and fasting, the Most High got you. Right? The physical act of circumcision was introduced by God as a sign of the Abrahamic covenant. This is my covenant with you and your descendants after you. Every male among you should be circumcised. You are to undergo circumcision, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and you. Genesis 17, 10 through 11 in the NIV. It was a permanent cutting off of the foreskin of the male organ, and as such was a reminder of the perpetuity of the covenantal relationship Israel was enjoined to be faithful in circumcising all males. Each male baby was to be circumcised on the 8th day. Like I said, it's something that was established already in Genesis. So when Harper said they started to do it later in Leviticus 12, that's off, man. No, it's not true. Genesis chapter 17, verse 12, Leviticus chapter 12 and verse 3. You see how they include both. So the Vines is accurate on that. Not only were the physical descendants of Abraham circumcised, but also those who were servants, slaves, and foreigners in the covenant community. That's where it get good. I ain't gonna go into any of it, but I'm gonna read it again though. Not only were the physical descendants of Abraham circumcised, but also those who are servants, slaves, and foreigners in the covenant community. Research what that is. Get into that. I do have it on. Yeah, I did implement it, right? I finished this PowerPoint some time ago, and I'm getting other classes ready. I was been supposed to record these classes about 2 months ago. I'm just now getting to it, but I think I have it on here. Pretty sure I have it on here. Most High willing, I think I do. But it says the special act of circumcision was a sign of God's gracious promise, with the promise and covenantal relations. The Most High expected that his people would joyously and willingly live up to his expectations and thus demonstrate his rule on earth. To describe the heart attitude, several writers of scripture use the verb to circumcise. The circumcision of the flesh is a physical sign of commitment to God. Deuteronomy particularly is fond of the spiritual uses. This is the one I like, right? Spiritual uses of the verb to circumcise. Circumcise your hearts, therefore, and do not be stiff-necked any longer. Deuteronomy 10:16 in the NIV. You could also check Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 6. Jeremiah took over this usage. Circumcise yourselves to the Lord and take away the foreskins of your heart, ye men of Judah, because of the evil of your doings. Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 4. Few occurrences of the verb differ from the physical and the spiritual usage. So take that into account, right? Few occurrences of the verb differ from the physical and the spiritual usage of to circumcise. Mole in the book of Psalms has the meaning of to cut off, destroy. So you got to understand that circumcise can not only be used for physical circumcision, for the actual foreskin. It cannot only it also has meaning for spiritual meaning, circumcising your heart, right, or circumcising your lips, um, uh, and also because you got to think it means to cut off. So like the Most High can. At one point in time, he cut off Israel. So he basically circumcised Israel from himself. So there's many different ways that word can be, that word mole can be you or maul if you're using the Lashon Kodash, right? But it says few occurrences of the verb differ from the physical and the spiritual usage of to circumcise, mole or maul in the Lashon Kodash. In the book of Psalms has the meaning of to cut off, destroy. All the nations surrounded me, but in the name of the Lord, I cut them off. Right. So that this part, I cut them off, is going to be this word mole when you look into it. Right. It's going to be the same word that's used for circumcise. But in the name of the Lord, I cut them off. Psalms 118:10 NIV. You can also check verses 11 through 12 as well. Compare verses 11 through 12. I'll be trying to remember what this CF mean, and it's basically saying like to compare, if I remember correctly. You got to go fact check me on that. The verb is translated as peritemno in the Septuagint, the Greek. The verb and the noun peritomi are used in both the physical and the spiritual sense. In addition to this, it also is a figure for baptism. Right? So keep that in mind. In addition to this, it is also as a figure for baptism. In him, you were also circumcised, not a circumcision alone by the hands of men, but with the circumcision done by Christ, having been buried with him in baptism and raised with him through your faith in the power of God who raised him from the dead. Colossians 2 NIV. Right? In the English versions of the verb is rendered, the verb is rendered to circumcise, to destroy in the KJV, as well as to cut off and to wither, which is in the RSV, New American Standard Bible, and the NIV, right? Also, you got the Jacinius Hebrew Chaldee Lexicon, right? I'm trying to get good at using this thing, but I don't know Hebrew. Neither do I know Greek, right? But I try to extract what I can that I know is that can be used, and that is kind of that used to kind of prove what it is that's being studied. And also you can use this. It's meant to be paired with a concordance, the Strong's, and even the Vines is the same way. But you got H4135, you got that word mole, as we see, right? To cut off, to circumcise, right? So you'll see in certain of the PowerPoints I'll use, I'll grab definitions so you guys can actually see them. And like, if you study the Bible but you're not exercising, lexicons, you're not exercising using biblical tools such as Bible dictionaries, so on and so forth. Like, this is the reason why sometimes you'll see me put these things in these PowerPoints so you can actually see for yourself if you don't have hard copies, if you don't have a Gesenius or something, but also so you can see how they're defining it, right? Even when it comes to the Hebrew, this is how it's being defined in the Hebrew, right? So if you're using blue letter, you most likely gonna see this. But it's good to have you some physical hard copies, man. Some physical hard copy where you could thumb through it yourself, right? But mole, it says to cut off, to circumcise. It tells you to compare this Hebrew word, which I don't know. Can't tell you that. But to cut off, to circumcise. And you have the scriptures, Genesis 21:4, Exodus chapter 12, verse 44. Got these scriptures. And it says to circumcise, to cut off, and of the foreskin, right? So Genesis 17:23, then you got metaphorically Deuteronomy 10:16, which we've seen the vines talk about as well. And you got some other Hebrew words right here. I ain't gonna pronounce them for y'all, but I do know these letters. I could pronounce them to you in the Lashon Kodash, but I can't do it to you in the modern. I'm trying to learn the modern pronunciations. But anyway, circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart, remove impure things from your mind. Deuteronomy 30:6. Right. So you also have compared, and you have the Greek right here, Romans 2:29, and Arabic, to circumcise, to purge, because the foreskin was regarded as unclean and profane. Right. Now, when you look at that spiritually, or even when in regards to food, right, then you have the nifal, to be circumcised, to circumcise oneself. Figuratively, you see Jeremiah 4:4, so you see the vines is kind of lining up with what Gesenius is saying. So you can kind of see, like, okay, they put it, and obviously you go back and you go examine these scriptures yourself. Circumcise yourselves to Yahweh. That is, put away all wickedness from your minds and consecrate yourselves to Yahweh. Right. So then you have these other ways to use it, to cut down, right, which was talked about Psalms. And then you have down here to be cut off at the point, blunted, and arrows. So you see these other ways, other forms of using this word circumcised. All right. Let's go ahead. And then you got the Strongs. Got the Strongs. This is the Strong's Expanded Exhaustive Concordance. I have different Strongs too, but in here you'll see, right, H4135. Right. I'm not going to read all of this. I might, but I don't know. We'll see. But it says to cut short. Right. The preface, that is, to circumcise, by implication, to blunt, figurative, to destroy. All right. So you got mole, H4135, means to circumcise, cut off. Most of the occurrences in the Old Testament take place in the Pentateuch. So you see this is going right with the vines. Right with the vines. So all this is basically saying what the vines already said, but you can actually see the reason why I put this up is so you can see that they're saying the same thing, so you can kind of extract, okay, you can something you can go off of, and you go examine the scriptures yourself pertaining to the biblical definition of circumcision that it is written in the scriptures, right? And you use these tools to kind of see if it validates what the scripture is saying, therefore you can use them, right? So let's go ahead. Now, what is the biblical definition of uncircumcision, right? According to the Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary, you have uncircumcised, right? The first use is one who has not submitted to Jewish rite of circumcision. That would mean Gentiles, other nations, right? One who has not submitted to Jewish rite of circumcision. Gentiles, Genesis chapter 34, verse 14, which is we go get into. I'm pretty sure I had that on here, right? Judges chapter 14, verse 3, Romans chapter 4, verse 9, 3. The third use of it is one whose heart is not open to the Most High. Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 4, you see the Zondervan, you know, Bind, Zondervan, Jacinius, they all got, you know, they all using that script. They all see that there has other meanings, right? Jeremiah 6 and 10, Acts 7 and 51, right? So the vines, uncircumcision, right? In the Greek, it's peritomi, which we've seen a little bit about in the circumcision. It says, yeah, peritomi. It says a cutting round circumcision. The verse peritomi was a rite enjoined by God upon Abraham and his male descendants and dependents as a sign of the covenant made with him. I need to look for the other one, for the uncircumcised part. Let me see, because this is uncircumcision. Well, let's just read it, right? A cutting round circumcision was a rite enjoined by the Most High upon Abraham and his male descendants and dependents as a sign of the covenant made with him. Genesis chapter 17, Acts chapter 7, verse 8, Romans 4:11. Hence, Israelites termed Gentiles the uncircumcised. So that says a lot. So when you read in the New Testament, obviously, but we're in the Greek. When you read in the New Testament, you would have to then go against what this is saying right here. And just the whole narrative of the scriptures, if you think Gentiles in the New Testament, all of them as Israelites. And a lot of people don't really specify, you know, which ones is Gentiles. They just say they Israelites. Nobody really specify. I haven't seen nobody really specify. Oh, well, them like, you know. But anyways, hence Israelites termed Gentiles. We right here. Hence Israelites termed Gentiles the uncircumcised. Judges 15:18, 2 Samuel 1:20. So in the New Testament, but without the suggestion of contempt. Take that with you. So in the New Testament, but without the suggestion of contempt. At one point in time, we looked at them as like, man, these dudes, they ain't uncircumcised heathens, you know, so on and so forth. But in the New Testament, you see a whole different spirit. Right. So in the New Testament, but without the suggestion of contempt, that is Romans 2:26, Ephesians 2:11, the rite had a moral significance, Exodus 6:12 and 30, where it is metaphorically applied to the lips, so to the ear and the heart. Right. Then you had all the scriptures. It refers to the state of circumcision in Romans 2, Romans 3, Romans 4, 1 Corinthians 7, Galatians 5, Galatians 6, Colossians 3. In the economy of grace, no account is taken of any ordinance performed on the flesh. In the economy of grace, no account is taken of any ordinance performed on the flesh. Doesn't mean don't do it. Me personally, if I have a male child, I'm circumcising them. Right. I know it's a foreshadow. For me, it's more spiritual, but I'm still going to keep the law. But you do see Timothy being circumcised when Paul said it because of the Jews. You got to look into that a little bit more on exactly why. But when it says in the economy of grace, no account is taken of any ordinance performed on the flesh, which is incorrect, because when you go to, I think it's Acts chapter 16, Timothy was Paul circumcised Timothy. I think it was Paul circumcised, but Timothy got circumcised, right? Go fact check that. I think it's Acts chapter 16, if I remember correctly. Acts chapter 16. In the economy of grace, no account is taken of any ordinance performed on the flesh. The old racial distinction is ignored in the preaching of the gospel. A lot of brothers and sisters think otherwise. And faith is the sole condition upon which the favor of God and salvation is to be obtained. Romans 10, 1 Corinthians 7, also Romans 4. Upon the preaching of the gospel to and the conversion of Gentiles, upon the preaching of the gospel to and the conversion of Gentiles, a sect of Jewish believers arose who argued that the gospel without the fulfillment of circumcision would make void the law and make salvation impossible. that's what the whole Paul and the Pharisees. Then that's one thing, brother. I just got to mention this. That's one thing brothers really don't really mention is that the Pharisees wasn't even tripping. They just wanted the Gentiles to be circumcised. They didn't really say, oh, they can't be saved, and like how brothers be doing today, be doing extra. The Pharisees wasn't even tripping. They just wanted them to be circumcised. They wasn't tripping if they could be saved. So why today do we see a lot of brothers trip on that Gentiles can't be saved and so on and so all that stuff, man. I've taught it at one point in time as well. But if you really look at Acts 15, the Pharisees wasn't even tripping. They just wanted them to be circumcised, which is crazy. Like, you really don't notice that unless you really paying attention and you really sitting and meditating on the scriptures. That's one thing that could be extracted from that too. But Acts 15:1. Hence, this party was known as the circumcision. Remember that. Let me read. Oh shit. Let me go back up a little bit. Let me go back to up a sentence. Let me go up a sentence. Let me just read it. Upon the preaching of the gospel to and the conversion of Gentiles, a sect of Jewish believers arose who argued that the gospel, without the fulfillment of circumcision, would make void the law and make salvation impossible. Acts 15:1. Hence, this party was known as the circumcision. Who was that party? The Jewish believers. They redeemed the circumcision. So you gotta pay attention, man. Uh, Hence, this party was known as the circumcision. Acts 10, all these other scriptures, right? The term being used by metonymy, the abstract being put for the concrete, as with the application of the word to Jews generally. Then you got all these scriptures. Go back in and go check, right? Before I even went through all of this, I seen it in the scriptures, but then I decided to actually just go to biblical tools to see what they say, and they saying what I seen over time, some while ago, long time ago, a few years ago. But the term being used by metonymy, the abstract being put for the concrete, as with the application of the word to Jews generally. Yeah, all the scriptures, some scriptures. It is used metaphorically and spiritually of believers with reference to the act, Colossians 2, Romans 2, to the condition, Philippians 3. The Apostle Paul's defense of the truth and his contention against this propaganda form the main subject of the Galatian epistle. And then, compare this word, catatomy, concision, Philippians 3, see concision, right? Acrobustia, right? Uncircumcision is used, of the physical state in contrast to the act of circumcision, right? Meaning not being physically circumcised. Acts chapter 11, verse 3, literally having uncircumcision. Romans 2. Then you have, though they be in uncircumcision, right? 1 Corinthians, you got these scriptures right here. B, by metonymy, for Gentiles. Talking about uncircumcision. Then you got more scriptures, right? Then you got D, in a metaphorical or transferred sense, or of the moral condition in which the corrupt desires of the flesh still operate. Note, in Romans 4:11, the phrase, though they be in uncircumcision, translates the Greek phrase, de acrobustius, literally through uncircumcision. Here, dia has the local sense of proceeding from and passing out. All right. That was in the noun form. That's why it's good to know nouns, what a noun is, person, place, thing, so so on and so forth. Adjective, that's explaining a noun, right? A verb and the action. Knowing what these things mean is good, because when you go through these words, you have to understand the speech. That's what they'll call it, this speech. Or parts of speech, which is noun, verbs, adjectives, pronouns, things of that sort, right? So knowing these, and when you get into these words, even though you might not speak the language, you could still get an understanding of how this word is being used, when in definitely with the reading of context. So when you understand what a noun is, you can kind of get the gist of it, what this word is in this language, to be able to understand what it is saying when you're reading the text. But adjective, aperitomatos. I don't know. I don't speak Greek, so I'm just throwing that out there. But uncircumcised in the adjective form, uncircumcised, G564. A negative peri around temno, to cut, is used in Acts chapter 7, verse 51, metaphorically of heart and ears. Then the verb forms, right? You got this word, G4059, to circumcise, is used literally, that is in Luke 1, Luke 2, of receiving circumcision. B, metaphorically, of spiritual circumcision, right? And you got this Greek word, G 1986, literally, to draw over, to become uncircumcised, as if to Ephes Judaism. It appears in 1 Corinthians 7. Right? So we have these sources and these biblical tools and what they say pertaining to circumcision and uncircumcision, and the biblical definition of these things, so that we can take and be able to use, or to see if it lines up with actually what the scripture is saying, when you do your due diligence in reading, meditating, and studying the word of the Most High. So we have the Strong's Concordance as well. You'll see some of these words that were in the vines. You're going to see these in the Strong's, and it's kind of saying the same thing that the vines is saying, right? But the link will be provided in the description. Most High willing, I can get it to work, because the past few times it ain't been letting me put it in the description. But so yeah, let's go ahead and continue, right? Much time we got left? All right, we're gonna cut it here, because I don't even want to really I really want to get into it, right? But I needed some extra time to get into what it is that we gonna get into on the next part 2, man. So stay tuned, man. Want to give all honor and glory to the Heavenly Father in the name of His Son, Yeshua. I'm trying to stop saying Yahweh. I'm gonna keep it real, because I'm just throwing this out there. It's got nothing pertaining to the class, right? But I'm trying to stop saying Yahweh, because linguistically there's no evidence of that. There's no evidence of that pronunciation. On a scholarly level and a linguistic level, there's no evidence of that. But how I also is that the Lashawan Kodash was kind of passed down from an elder that had a dream. So it's kind of you gotta do your due diligence and go in and studying certain things. But I want to give all honor and glory to the Heavenly Father in the name of His Son, Yeshua HaMashiach. Man, the water for tuning in. Well, thank you for tuning in. May the Most High watch over you all. I want to say shalom.